this is a very special opportunity to have John update us, talk to us about what's going on, and really a privilege that he brought his special guest as well, which I will turn the introduction over to him. Thank you, John.
Can everyone hear me okay? Now?
Yeah.
Better? Okay. So we're going to talk about some of the new things coming down the way. And so first I figured I'd speak about some of the old, just for means of background. Probably no one in the audience remembers Father Guido Sarducci from Saturday Night Live. He had a concept of the 5-minute university, and the thought goes something like this. The average person graduating from college 5 years after they finish doesn't remember a whole lot, and so he'd only teach what they would remember. So for example, economics, supply and demand is about all you're going to remember 5 years later, so all he taught you was supply and demand. And so in that respect, this is a little bit like that. If there's stuff, some of my slides are a little bit more busy, but really what I'll do is point you to what's a very excellent website for the IRB. It has all the background information. If you want to know how we make decisions, it has our worksheets, our checklists. It kind of takes all the protocols and distills it into something that's manageable and you can go through. If you want to know what form you fill out, it's on the website. I'll show you a tiny bit of that. As far as the IRB, we have 2 clinical IRBs that meet essentially twice a month, so that's a total of every week for the clinical. There is a social committee, and I have an asterisk that we actually have the capacity to form an ad hoc committee if we need to on a pretty quick basis. We could turn it around in a couple days, easy, sometimes the same day. And that would be for emergency protocols or whatnot, or maybe you've got a planned deviation of a patient coming in that you need to do a little bit different on the clinical protocol. We can approve, disapprove, modify. We conduct a continuing review of the protocols, audits, and we, by and large, we assure documentation and compliance. Cindy could talk to this, but she's represented the university multiple times to FDA audits. Okay, so when the FDA comes, she makes it relatively seamless and is there to protect and represent the PI. And so at that time, you'll recognize how important it is to have all these documentations in place. 3 types of IRB reviews. There's exempt, there's expedited, and there's the full board committee. The exempt means that it falls within, there's 6 federally defined categories. These are the lowest risk ones, and really what it boils down to is there's like the anonymous surveys or the review of a de-identified anonymous database. There's an expedited, and expedited in this sense doesn't mean faster, though it can be quicker. It's either reviewed by the chair or designated experienced reviewer. We have a lot of it done by administrative staff, and that actually improves the turnover. It comes down that there's also federally defined categories that can be used for this expedited, and they're all minimal risk. Minimal risk is defined to what the magnitude of impact to a person in normal daily life. So if what you're doing or proposing is about what they're going to experience in normal daily life, we consider that minimal risk. There's quite a few of the categories, but the ones that are most common for the audience would be stuff like a collection of blood samples, collection of data through non-invasive procedures, let's say something like a sense of a pulse oximeter or something that you're not having to actually penetrate or do something to the patient, or chart reviews of material that was collected initially for the purpose of non-research purposes, and you're going back and now doing a research project. Everything else that's not exempt or expedited falls into the full committee. And then, as I said, we have at least one committee meeting pretty much every week. So by and large, we can turn around or get to the protocols as necessary. These are just some of the determinations. So let's talk about, well, now that you have the different things, what is my responsibility as a PI? And this is going to touch upon a little bit of it. And what I'm really going to highlight is the bottom, that ultimately the principal investigator is responsible for all the work conducted on that project. So you need to be the one to assure that everything is in compliance and done in the appropriate fashion. I could almost leave it there. If you want to know, well, what's my responsibilities or what does that entail, you can go to the website, and we have an investigator's manual that goes through a lot of these requirements, our policies, and again, the website will describe a lot of it. If you have questions, you could always ask myself, or Cindy's a wonderful reference. Everybody doing research has to have city training. If it's minimal risk, it could be either the city or the NIH. Greater than minimal risk, city training. If it involves clinical trials, it's going to be the city and the GCP. This all can be accessed again on the website. It's free and it's required. Everyone should recognize that as you're turning in protocols, there will be an overlap, that sometimes you will have to interface with getting input or approval by various committees. Things that you do on an ongoing basis, protocols change, you have to turn in modifications, and there will be things that we are forms on the website that you can do to turn this in. Sometimes it needs to go to a full committee for approval, but the vast majority of them actually go through the expedited. There's a number of things that as a PI you have to make sure they're reported in 5 days of your knowledge. Two biggest ones are new risks that represent safety issue, or if there's been harm experienced by a subject. There's a long list of additional ones, and I'll reference you back to the website to this. It's actually part of our form, so as you're pulling up the form, it'll even go through a lot of these things as reminders. Every year, and this is actually going to be changing a little bit, but right now as it stands, we have the protocols come on a yearly basis where we update it and review it. We essentially go through all the same criteria when it was first approved. This is a reference to make sure that you acknowledge that there's going to be a certain amount of record keeping that you need to have. So you have to have the original application, stamp forms, all the paperwork, and the original signed consent forms, and you have to keep them. If you want to know how long, it's on the website. It's for several years. Keep on your radar. These are just some things that I've noticed over the time that can you can go astray on. No, the IRB is not there to keep you from practicing medicine. Yes, there's times that you use things off-label that are approved. Some of the H2 blockers aren't approved for treatment of GERD or even some ulcers, but we still use them all the time. Okay. Nonetheless, if there's an unapproved or investigational agent, you can't use it without IRB approval. Okay. So if it's not approved for anything by the FDA, you can't just use it off-label. You have to let us know, and there will be a mechanism. Yes, there's a way of using some promising device. It's in a clinical trial for the treatment of your emergency or patient that's in an emergency situation. There's a mechanism. I do have something that the IRB needs to be notified within 5 days, but the fact is we can even convene a full committee to review it well within that amount of time, which is really why we have this ad hoc IRB is for situations like that. There's checklists, if you want to know, on the website. How would you do it? It has everything that we need to follow, and try to make it pretty streamlined. By and large, the best thing to do is just call us, and we can guide you through it. There's a number of different requirements, and we've done it before. We could do it again. This really isn't an IRB issue, but something that surgeons need to know. If you're going to use something in the operating room that really deviates from what's the standard or accepted medical practice, it may be for clinical use, it may be research. There is an innovative care committee, and by and large, when these things come through the down the line, it'll interface with both the IRB and the Chief Executive Officer, where they'll decide amongst this whether it's going to go through the innovative care and be signed off, or whether it's going to go through the IRB. But just know that when you're filling out the application where you're booking a patient for surgery, there's even an area in there that kind of triggers you to think about whether you're going to be doing something that's may fall into this category. And there's a policy and procedures. This is a shout out to our research website, and you can access it. Use Google IRB UC Davis, and you'll get there. Or you can go through researchucdavis.edu, and you'll get there just looking at the policies and procedures. It has area for researchers or area for participants. I'm not really doing it justice with this brief amount, but it'll have all our policies, procedures, all the federal regulations, state regulations, our worksheets, checklists, how we make determinations, how to contact us, everything's there. Over time, we've had it where you can electronically submit IRB proposals, and this is one of the shots of how you get there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy. Cindy's been with us for a number of years. Her training, she has quite a varied background. She's trained as a nurse and also has a law degree. She's been on IRB for many years, both in the, I guess, Western IRB, which is not with the academics, kind of a private IRB, and then she's been with us for a number of years. She's taken us through our initial accreditation for AHARP, and most recently a re-accreditation. The accreditation's on the level of something like the trauma designation. So it's many, many months of preparation, back and forth with the reviewing agency, and then also they'll actually come out and do a site visit. So I'm very pleased with how things have gone with the IRB. A lot of the checklists, a lot of the website stuff I can directly attribute to her input as she came through. She's a wonderful reference. I actually enjoy the fact that she's a lawyer because it brings a lot of the nuances, and a lot of the stuff is regulations, and she is able to maneuver that in a very practical sense. I'd encourage you, if you have questions, if I can't answer them, she's really open door policy. Again, it's a reference to use. So with that.
Thank you for all those slides. Thank you. Will my slides go up? Dr. Farmer, you said I had a captive audience. Can we lock the doors? We're looking for IRB members.
Yeah.
Anyone? It's really a good job. Help your peers. Call me if you want to be an IRB member. Okay, so our regulators have run amok in the last couple of years. They've made a lot of new changes to research. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. We're going to talk about a few of them this morning. Some of it's not really fun. If you do NIH-funded research, you automatically have this thing called a certificate of confidentiality. And that means that you have a different type of onus to protect the data that are identifiable and are about your subjects. And it means that it is protected from warrants. Even the Congress of the US cannot get hold of that data unless you've let it out the door somehow, or the subject has let it out the door somehow. So it applies to identifiable data, which according to their definitions is anything. And it applies to sensitive data, which according to their definition is anything. And so your responsibilities then are to have SOPs in place to ensure that everyone understands that once the information gets outside of your research, it's no longer protected by the COC. And we as a university have said we will protect the information. And so here are some of the rules on here. Will they get copies of the slides if they want them?
Yes.
Okay, so I won't go through all the rules with it. But what you need to understand, if you share or collaborate and then you share data, the best thing, of course, is to give it in a de-identified manner and you keep a link to the identity. Nevertheless, it's still protected by the COC, and the recipient of that data has to protect it just like you do. Any questions about that? Okay. The other NIH policy is this single IRB thing. So if you're going to collaborate on the same protocol with different institutions doing the same thing, and you have NIH money for that protocol, and all the sites are in the US, you have to use one IRB. And so it takes a lot of planning. And the big kicker with that is that the IRB fees, the cost of that IRB comes out of the grant. And if we're the single IRB, which we're happy to do, we will charge the other sites for the reviews that we have to do. It is taking months to get these started, and a lot of it is due to us. We are not staffed yet to handle this, but a lot of it also has to do with the collaborators because there's a lot of paperwork involved. If you're the lead PI, we try to make it as easy as possible for you, but you need to call us early as possible before you submit your grant application, your proposal, so we can help you include what you need to have in it for the single IRB process. You could use a commercial IRB. You can use a different IRB, a different institutional IRB. There are few IRBs who got a couple of million to set up a process to be a single IRB. Unfortunately, we didn't get that award. So you might want to choose one of those. There are University of Utah, Harvard, Colorado, and my senior brain can't think of the last one.
Are there any in the UC system?
No.
Yeah.
There are not. So big take-home message is contact us as early as possible. We're going to send you a worksheet to fill out to let us know if it qualifies for single IRB. At this point, if it doesn't qualify for single IRB, your best bet is to just let us review it and don't go for single IRB. It'll work faster. It's going to take a few years to get all this worked out. The big thing with the IRB, the problem are these agreements. And you talk about lawyers, this is where the lawyers get into it. And each institution has to have an agreement to rely on the other institution. And in most institutions, you have a lawyer look at it and they're going to start mucking with it. And it's going to take months to get those agreements. And that's why you have to contact us early. There's a way around all this. There is a template agreement that a lot of universities have signed on to. And if we could just use that, that would be the best way to go. And that's the SMART IRB. There's a way to get out of single IRB. If you want to try to get out of it, call me and I'll try to help. So now, I'm not going to talk about the definition of clinical trials right now. Believe it or not, Congress put this on hold. NIH came out with this definition a few years ago, and if you're doing an NIH-defined clinical trial, that means that you have to post it on clinicaltrials.gov, and you and your staff have to have GCP training, which is a few hours of work to get that GCP training. If you're doing FDA-regulated research at this point, you already have to have the GCP training, so it wouldn't be that much of an onus. But for psychologists and behavioral people who never thought that what they were doing was a clinical trial, it's turned into a big burden on them. Well, Congress put a halt to it a few months ago, and they said, let's don't enforce this definition for a while. NIH really hasn't yet agreed with Congress, even though Congress is supposed to be funding them today. But in my mind, I would say I could fight and say this is not a clinical trial if you're doing some sort of behavioral thing.
So I think the important message there is it doesn't have to be NIH funded to be considered a clinical trial under the NIH guidelines.
Right. It could be.
People gets confused.
Yeah, it's any NIH money. Like if you go through the CTSC, it would fit under this rule. So.
Father Guido Sarducci would say, just get the training.
Yeah.
And remember 5 minutes of it. Or you will get notes from the CTSC, little friendly messages saying register your trial. And you can call me or whatever if you think it's really not a clinical trial. Okay. So let's talk about the common rule. I'm not going to tell you when this common rule is going to start. It was supposed to start last year, and the day before it was supposed to start, they put a hold on it, and then it came back that, okay, it's going to start in July. And now it's not going to start in July, it's going to start in January. But part of it starts in July. And so we did start part of it. So it's just really crazy how this has happened. But what this rule does is it does include that definition of clinical trial, but it doesn't include any responsibilities that go with it. It changes the definition of human subject a little bit, such that if you're working with identifiable biospecimens, that is a human subject, even if you've never seen that person. It's already there. But if it's identifiable, that's a human subject. It also changed the definition of research just a little bit to exclude a few things. And one of the most important things is case studies. There's always this question, is a case study research? And now there's some parameters that we can give you if you're going to do a case study to show you that it is not research. And if it is research, we would be able to tell you that too. It's added a few exemptions. Remember Dr. Anderson talked about exemptions, and he said there were 6. Well, now there's going to be 8. And exempt's good because you don't have to get IRB review for it. You still need to send it to us because we want to make sure it's really exempt. We don't want you conducting some research that you had to have IRB review for and you don't get it. So we make the decision now if it's exempt. But there's going to be a few more categories. And one of those is a behavioral category. You can do minimal risk behavioral type study where you can randomize people and stuff. The big thing is the continuing review. All research has required continuing review ever since 1974, all federally funded. And now they've decided that minimal risk research, there's really no benefit to this continuing review thing. And so there are going to be probably about 60% of the research we review will no longer require that annual review, which means you don't have to send a report to us and submit all the new stuff. We are going to send you a notice. Like if your funding changes or if you get new funding, we really need to know that because we might not follow those rules if we don't know. We're trying to do the least burdensome way of getting your research approved so you can get out there and start conducting it. So we need to know if it's regulated and if you get any funding. That's really important. If you change PI, if a PI leaves, it's really important that you don't have research being conducted and there's no real PI, and that seems to happen a lot. So we're going to send notices out all the time at the what was continuing review to say, are there any changes? Submit it to us, please, please. One of the biggest changes and the most complicated changes with the revised common rule is informed consent. So we've had this template consent form that a lot of lawyers put together and a lot of other people put together, and now the regulators say, no, you don't use that anymore. You've got to use this reasonable person consent form. And the consent form will start with, in most cases, will start with a summary of what a reasonable person would want to know. I don't know what a reasonable person wants to know, but I guessed, and I looked at what other institutions were doing. So we have a new template that is based on the requirements for the new NIH or the common rule requirements. So I would really appreciate it if you're going to start a new trial or a new study of any type, if you would use the new template. We're going to remove the old one pretty soon, but it's best if you start using the new one, and we can apply that new rule as soon as possible then, and you won't have as much burden on some things if we're able to do that. So it's posted on our website, and it's pretty easy to follow, and I took out all the red type because I thought that was scary. And there's a requirement to post your consent form. So if you're the lead site and you have funding for your study, you're going to have to post that consent form on a website that hasn't been developed yet. And so understand that when you're developing your consent form, I see someone smiling back there. Your work will be posted on this government website, and you post it it's 60 days after the last subject. They didn't say which version of your consent form to post, and they haven't given us that guidance yet. And so keep improving it. Maybe the last version would be the best. There also is a provision for this thing called broad consent. And at UC Davis, we've elected not to do the broad consent. Broad consent was a thing that we could get this general consent from people to use their data and specimens in an identifiable manner for research, and you just get consent from all your patients. Usually when they're patients is when you would do this. But the problem with tracking who consented and who didn't and who consented for what is just too burdensome. My recommendation, if you want to do research with data and specimens, is you get IRB approval or do it in a de-identified manner. If you have just anonymous specimens or coded data, then you really don't need IRB approval for it. You can get an opinion from us, which we really want you to do, but there's no SOP or regulation that says you have to get IRB approval for that. And so we didn't really find a place for broad consent here. It used to be you had to either get consent or get a waiver of consent for screening activities. Like pharmaceutical company says, how many subjects can you enroll? And so you're looking and trying to figure out how many you have there, or you think you have a subject that's going to meet eligibility requirements, so you want to look in the record and see if they're eligible. Well, they decided to do away with the requirement for consent for that. Unfortunately, the other side of the government, the HIPAA side, says you still have to get authorization to do that or a waiver of authorization to do that. So you still have to do something. This didn't really have much of effect. And then right now, I was talking about single IRB review. Well, single IRB is a requirement of NIH. If you get NSF funding or if you get CDC funding, it's not a requirement. But I think maybe CDC it is a requirement. Erase that line right there. But in 2020, all federal funding will require single IRB review if it's multiple site with more than one site in the U.S. and they're doing the same protocol. Wow, I have 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So there was a speaker at the American Association of Thoracic Surgery meeting this year who brought up an interesting question, which I just wonder how the IRB would deal with it here. His feeling was that every patient that we operate on, we should be getting a consent as part of the surgical consent to be able to use any data surrounding their surgery or post-op care later for research in order to improve patient care.
Right. That is that's an
kind of like the
ethical statement. Our consent documents right now have that language kind of embedded in there. People don't know it. That's not informed consent because they really, I mean, how many people besides me read every word of the surgical consent form? So they don't really read it. It's not informed. We should be telling our patients that if you're a patient here at UC Davis, we might use your data and specimens for research purposes. We are a teaching and research institution. And from an ethical side, there's not a regulatory requirement for that. If you can use de-identified material and information at this point without telling your patient even.
In the consent form, there's some boilerplate information for future use specimens, where it stipulates, and that gives you a little bit of wiggle room for using the specimens in the future. And then there's a lot of people who will have a section that'll say, can we contact you in the future for an ongoing trial, you know, something like that. So we've tried to future-proof it a tiny bit.
So I mean, our surgical consent form isn't necessarily approved by the IRB, is it?
No,
Right?
no,
It's
it's
a separate
not.
form.
No, it's
So-
not. Yeah, I just
That's
know
what I
that.
was getting at. Is
Yeah.
there a stance IRB has on being able to do that just generally?
There is a research study that's ongoing at UC Davis. It's being conducted in only a few departments right now. It has not gotten to the Department of Surgery, where when subjects register or patients register, they're asked at that point if they want to allow their information and biospecimens to be used. And so that is happening right now, but it's happening kind of slowly, and it's UCOP driven is where it comes from. Yes?
So, I don't know if you may have the answer or not, but innovative surgical techniques that have been done at other institutions and they've been written about as well. Doing them here at UC Davis, it would require modification of a device outside the IFU. Does that require an IRB approval from this institution?
Every situation is different. So usually when Dr. Kirk gets a request for innovative care, he will contact me and we'll discuss it to see if it comes under any regulations like the FDA. So if you have a device, I have to determine if that's a custom device for a single patient versus a device that is investigational, which might fall under FDA jurisdiction requiring an IDE.
It's not an investigation. In other words, the device has been approved already by the FDA. You just need to modify that device outside of the IFU for that device.
And again, it would be something that Dr. Kirk and I would consult together. Every situation is different.
So I can speak to this just a little bit as well. There are institutional cultures around this. So the culture at Davis is different than the culture in San Francisco, is different than the culture in Kaiser, and this is why when actually Cindy asks, you know, do we want any surgeons to be on these boards or be on the IRB, it's really helpful because we can help educate folks. What she said that I think is really important is that generally, if it's an already approved device that is being customized for individual use in this patient, and you're doing it just for patient care, that tends to be something that falls, and correct me if I'm wrong,
You're
Cynthia,
right.
that falls into the category of it's okay. So I do think it's really important when you, so we've had some missteps by people sort of not asking the right way or approaching Dr. Kirk the right way. And of course, we also have a culture of having, we got risk averse for a while about 6 years ago when we, had a big institutional problem. So whenever there's, a problem, people change their thinking. We are, I would say, we're getting away from that. We're getting better, and everybody got gun shy about doing anything. So, unfortunately, patients, I think, were harmed by people not being willing to do the right thing for the patient because of all this, drama that occurred. I think we're getting back to the normal state, and you should feel emboldened to ask the question. If there's something that you need to do, and of course, vascular surgery, Matt's not here anymore, but, all those devices are practically, as you know, individually modifiable for every patient. You have to put them together. You have to, that at this point for those vascular stent grafts probably doesn't even require, they're intended to be individually assembled, probably doesn't even require asking. But I can help with this as well.
Good.
But Cindy is also, you should, I think my message to everybody is you should do what you think is the right thing. And if you have a question about it, come to me first. I'll help guide you, or John can help as well. But in general, and med staff looks at this stuff as well, and there's a policy, different institutions have, you can do it 3 times before it has to be considered a trial. Other places you can just do it once, and then if you think you want to try it again, if it's something really new, then it should be done under the context of a trial. But we can help you with this, and I will have to say this: we couldn't have a better person in this position in terms of understanding both the medical issues and the legal issues around this. And you do want to be protected from a legal point of view in the future.
So what's your one of the things that I really like about being a part of the IRB, and what you're coming up against is a little bit of, you're hearing different things. I know the specifics of what you're asking about, and we can, in all likelihood, take care of it in the IRB if that's your only route of going about it. So I like the fact that we've got a fair amount of wiggle room here, and so if the institution decides that, well, you've got to put it through research, even though it doesn't fit, we'll help you.
Yes, and I think that's another thing that's a good comment.
Yes.
That if you've got an idea, sometimes it's better for you, as opposed to getting it stuck in sort of Kirk shop, to go through the IRB and create a study.
I think if we're gonna, like other institutions, write up our results of this new innovative technology, probably having IRB approval might be beneficial. I don't know. I'll submit it.
And we can help. We can help with that submission. Oh, there's
We've
behind.
got a soft spot for clinical
I was going to
patient
say
care,
that
so.
I've had some problems in the past that you probably remember, the small mitral valve.
Yes.
Yeah, that you helped with tremendously, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Was trying to go through the innovative care and use to med staff was a special kind of help.
Yeah.
So,
The IRB is better, to be honest, than med staff with this. I think that's really a great message here.
Yeah, we want you to be able to do patient care that's ethical and safe, and even if it's innovative.
And if the FDA audits us, we've got experience for that.
Yeah, we had an audit last week, flying colors, no findings.
Yeah, no, it's really, the culture here, you're better off with, Cindy and her team understand this better than Kirk and his team.
Yes, to get a exempt ruling on a study, you said there's a list of 6 going to be expanded to 8 or whatever the number was. Where are those listed?
Well, the 6 right now, they're listed on our website. You can also, you can call us. There's an exemption checklist that we use. And then there's a section, does my research or does my protocol need IRB review? And I take you all the way through, is it really research? Is it human subject research? And is it exempt? So you can just read that and figure it out that way too. We'll add the extra exemptions when they become, when it becomes effective.
One of the issues that, regarding that, I would ask is the entirely retrospective review of patient medical records that could be de-identified. Once you pull the list of patients, then they could be totally de-identified from any medical record number or patient name. Does that need IRB approval?
Yes, because to get into the record in the first place, you need what we call a waiver of authorization, because that record belongs to that patient. And the only way you can get into that record is for treatment, payment, and healthcare operations, not research. And so we take care of that, and then we would call it exempt. Or if you're writing any identifiers down, we would do it under the expedited level.
So that first sentence, then you would end up calling it exempt after you've done that step?
Well, before you go into the record, you come to us, you submit a protocol, and we have a really easy protocol that you can submit for patient record reviews. And then we would make the determination of exempt or at expedited. At this time, there's really no difference between exempt and expedited as far as your responsibilities.
I don't know this, but it seems to me that, having done a number of these in the past, there is great institutional variability in their willingness to call something exempt.
Yeah.
Why is that?
When I got here, that kind of research was not exempt because it requires, at this point, an IRB person to approve that waiver to let you get into the record. And so they just move it up to a different level, which then you had to have continuing review. At this point, you're not going to have continuing review. And so it really doesn't matter. Exempt or expedited really won't make a difference under the new regs. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, so, every conversation that I have with a PI starts with, I want to do a simple project. And so everyone starts from the kind of the basis that theirs is probably exempt or doesn't require much. Now that's a lot of the time they're accurate. But what we want to protect against is when they've completed the project, let's say they made a self-determination that was exempt, and then they turned in something that really wasn't exempt, or they're going to publish it, and the journal asks for, did your IRB look at it, and then you in haste come to us and say, hey, can you look at this retrospectively and approve it for us so that we can publish it, and then we have to give you the notice that, along the way you should have, let us know. So that's what it's protecting us against.
Yeah, I think this is where the department has stumbled and people have just not been educated and they learn it when they're trying to publish it and the journal asks. You're exactly right. Essentially today, almost everything you do, even the 5-case review, you need to run it by the MRI, run it by the IRB in the beginning.
But we've got great representation of IRB members and staff in the surgery department. So we've got lots of resources that you can ask and
it's really
to us.
And John, you've been a great help, and I think we've helped try to build this infrastructure over the last several years for the department to try to make it easy and to try to have resources. Both Mary Beth Lawless's team in trauma directly. You've got folks in and Maricela can help guide people in addition to John.
Any other questions?
And that's why everything has to come through my office. We had some people recently saying, no, it doesn't have to get signed off. That's not true. Everything has to get signed off.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.